The security guard's radio crackled twice before he looked up from his clipboard. Name? Whitfield. Reese Whitfield. He ran his finger down the list, ran it again. The afternoon sun was hitting the white stone facade of Hargrove Estate directly, and the heat came off it in waves. Somewhere inside, a string quartet was playing something I recognized but could not name. Magnolia and warm asphalt, the smell of a Savannah summer that has not decided to become evening yet. I'm not seeing you, ma'am. Try Amory, my grandmother's name. Sometimes they use that. He checked. He shook his head. Behind me, two women in silk dresses and stacked heels moved past with the easy confidence of people whose names are always on the list. One of them glanced at me the way you glance at something that doesn't quite fit the frame. I was 33 years old. I ran a company with 47 employees. I was wearing a navy dress I had paid $400 for, and I was standing on white gravel outside my sister's wedding while a man with a clipboard told me I did not exist. Can you call someone inside? I said. My father, Gerald Whitfield. The guard reached for his radio. He did not need to use it. My father appeared at the top of the stone steps before the guard finished keying in. Tailored suit, pale blue tie, the signet ring he'd worn since before I was born. Golf tan on his forearms. He looked like a man arriving at something he had arranged, which was exactly what he was. He took in the situation in 2 seconds. His expression did not change. That was the part that would stay with me. Not what came next. The fact that there was no flicker of anything when he saw his daughter standing at the gate being turned away. He did not come down the steps. He spoke from where he was, loud enough that the guests standing near the entrance doors turned to look. We can't let a poor cleaner shame the family. The words landed the way a hand comes down flat on a table, not sharp, final. The gravel pressed up through the thin soles of my heels. I became aware of it precisely then, that small physical fact, because everything else stopped registering correctly. The string quartet was still playing. A woman behind me laughed at something her companion said. The afternoon kept happening around me as if I hadn't just been named and dismissed in the same breath by the man who was supposed to be my father. Vivian stepped out from behind the floral arch at the top of the steps, white dress catching the light, and when she saw the scene, she covered her mouth with one hand. I thought for a moment it was shock. Then I saw her shoulders shake and understood it was not. My mother was standing 3 feet to the right of my father. She had a champagne flute in both hands, the stem held the way you hold something when you need to look occupied. She was looking at the hydrangea arrangement beside the door. 8 people were watching. I counted without meaning to. I reached up and touched the locket at my throat, small and warm from sitting against my skin all afternoon. It had belonged to my grandmother, June Amory, and she had given it to me 2 weeks before she died with the specific instruction that I wear it on days that required courage. I had thought that meant job interviews and difficult phone calls. I looked at my father. Enjoy your day, I said. I turned around and walked to my car. The gravel made a particular sound under my shoes, dry and deliberate, and I focused on that because it was the only thing I was certain of. I did not run. I did not look back. I found my car in the 3rd row of the lot, got in, and pulled the door shut behind me with both hands. I sat there for a long moment with the engine off and the windows up and the Savannah heat pressing in from all sides. My phone buzzed. Mom. I looked at the message. It's better this way, honey. I set the phone face down on the passenger seat. The drive back to my apartment in downtown Savannah takes 40 minutes on a Saturday afternoon. I did it on autopilot, making every turn without thinking about it. The city moving past my windows in the slow, golden way it does in late summer. By the time I pulled into my parking spot and turned off the engine, I had made a decision. I did not know it yet. The decision was ahead of the thought. My hands were already steady when I went upstairs, already purposeful when I set my bag on the kitchen table and opened my laptop. Amory Services Group. That's my company, named after my grandmother's maiden name, which felt like the right choice for a business I built with money I had earned by doing the work my family used to use as a punchline. The dashboard loaded, and I sat down in front of it in my $400 navy dress, and I pulled up the Whitfield Callaway contract. Every vendor agreement for the wedding at Hargrove Estate flowed through Amory Services Group. Cleaning crews for the venue, the rehearsal space, the bridal suite, the reception hall. We had the primary contract. 3 layers of subcontracting separated my company's name from the client's paperwork, which was how I preferred it, which was also why my father had signed a booking agreement with a company he had never heard of, whose owner he had just called a poor cleaner in front of 8 witnesses. I had known this for 6 months. I had decided 6 months ago to let it go. The invitation had come in a cream envelope with Vivian's name in gold script on the front, which already told me something about whose event this was considered to be. Tucked inside behind the formal card was a printed email chain. An accident, I think. My mother's email address was in the forward chain, and my mother has never been careful with technology. The last message in the chain was from my father, dated 4 weeks before the invitations went out. Keep Reese off the main list. She can come to the reception if she behaves. I had read it standing at my kitchen counter with my coffee going cold. I read it 3 times. Then I took a screenshot, filed it in a folder I labeled with the date, and told myself it did not matter. He had always done this. He would always do this. I was 33 years old, and I had built something real without a dollar of his help, and his opinion of where I belonged on a guest list was not something I needed to carry. That's what I told myself. Now I was sitting in the same kitchen, in the same chair, pulling up the same screenshot on my phone. Same words, same date. The only thing that had changed was that I had just stood in a parking lot in front of 8 people and been called what he'd always privately believed I was. Not privately anymore. I set the phone down and looked at the dashboard. The Whitfield-Callaway contract. $212,000 in service agreements across 6 months of event preparation. Gerald Whitfield's signature on the primary booking. His personal guarantee on the payment terms. He had signed it without reading it. I knew that because I had been there when Cole flagged the clause, the one buried on page 11 about liability for emergency replacement services if the primary vendor withdrew. Cole had laughed a little when he pointed it out. He'd said, "Whoever signed this for the client didn't have a lawyer in the room. My father had signed it himself. He was proud of handling the family finances personally. He had been a regional bank manager for 30 years, and he knew how money worked, and he had signed a contract with a company called Amory Services Group without once asking who owned it." I picked up my phone and typed a message to Cole Breckenridge, who had been my attorney for 6 years and my friend for 8. And who answered his texts on Saturday nights because that was the kind of person he was. "I need to talk about the Whitfield account." The reply came 4 minutes later. "Monday. Bring everything." I closed the laptop. I sat in the quiet of my apartment while the last of the afternoon light moved across the kitchen floor. The locket was still warm when I touched it, same as it always was, same as my grandmother's hands had been when she pressed it into mine and told me to wear it on hard days. She had not been wrong about the days that were coming. She rarely was. I was not going to let it go. Cole's reply sat on my phone all Sunday. "Monday. Bring everything." I brought everything. The manila folder I laid on his conference table the next morning held 3 months of work I had done quietly after hours in the margins of running an actual business. Bank statements, trust filings, a copy of my grandmother's original estate documents, which I had requested from the county clerk's office 6 weeks ago by submitting a simple public records form and paying a $12 fee. The accounting flag my operations manager Denise had left on my desk in March. A yellow sticky note attached to a printout that said, "Account number doesn't match any current vendor." Check? I had checked. Cole sat across from me with his reading glasses on and his coffee untouched, working through the pages in the order I had arranged them. He did not say anything for a long time. Cole Breckenridge was the kind of attorney who thought before he spoke, which was one of the reasons I had hired him and one of the reasons I trusted him. He was 38, 5 years older than me, and he had the particular stillness of someone who had sat across from a great many people in difficult situations and learned that patience was not the same thing as passivity. He set the last page down. "The account number," he said. "Matches the trust," I said. I recognized it. I saw those statements on my grandmother's kitchen table when I was 16. She was reviewing them with the estate attorney. I didn't understand what I was looking at then, but numbers stay with me. He picked up the bank statement again. This payment was routed through the trust account in February, 3 months before Vivian's venue deposit was due. Yes. And the trust was supposed to release your share when you turned 25. Yes. You're 33. I'm aware. He took his glasses off, set them on the table, picked up his coffee and looked at it and set it back down. Reese, the total here is over $200,000. That's not a clerical error. No, I said, it's not. I knew what he was going to say next because Cole was systematic. And the next thing a systematic attorney says when you present evidence of trust mismanagement is that you can file to recover, but that the process will be slow and public and expensive and emotionally costly. And he was going to ask me if I was prepared for that, and I was going to tell him I did not know yet which was the truth. He said all of that. I told him I did not know yet. What I did not tell him, sitting in his conference room on that Monday morning, was that I had already pulled the vendor map for the Whitfield-Calloway wedding the night before, that I had sat at my kitchen table in the dark with my laptop open and walked through every contract in the chain. Catering and florals and lighting and staffing and the cleaning services that ran through 3 layers of subcontracting before landing at the very top of the chain at Amory Services Group. My company. My name on the primary agreement. Gerald Whitfield's signature on the booking. I had noticed something else while I was doing that. 3 vendor invoices in the chain used the same rotation of shell company names. The same 3 names, cycling, across different line items. I had spent enough years in the commercial services industry to recognize that pattern. It was not a coincidence. Somebody in the vendor chain was skimming, routing the excess through entities that looked like separate businesses and weren't. Troy Calloway's name appeared on every one of those invoices as the referring contact. I filed that information in the same mental folder where I kept everything else. Not yet. But I filed it. Cole walked me to the elevator when we were done. He put his hand briefly on my shoulder, the way he did when he wanted to say something that wasn't legal advice, and said, "Your grandmother wanted you to have this." He stole it. Then the elevator doors opened and I got in and rode down 14 floors to the parking garage and sat in my car and breathed. She had wanted me to have it. That was the thing I kept returning to, not the money. Though the money was real and the money mattered, but the fact that June Amory had sat across from an estate attorney and arranged for her granddaughter to receive something of her own, independent of the family's approval, independent of Gerald Whitfield's assessment of what Reese was worth. She had done that deliberately. She had written my name in a legal document, and he had crossed it out. Not literally. Trustees don't cross names out. They redirect. They reallocate. They cite the family's benefit in language that sounds administrative until you lay it next to a bank statement and understand that your grandmother's intention has been quietly dismantled piece by piece over 8 years, while you were building something without any of it. I drove back to the office. I had 47 employees and a business to run and 3 proposals due by end of week. I ran the business. 3 days after the wedding, my father called. I was in the middle of reviewing a staffing schedule when his name came up on my screen. Gerald. I looked at it for a moment. Then I answered. "I want to be clear about something," he said. He did not say hello. "If you're thinking about making trouble over that trust, I want you to understand who you're dealing with." "Good morning, Dad. Your grandmother's estate was handled according to what she would have wanted. The funds were reallocated for the family's benefit. Vivian needed support. You had your own income. Did you ask me about that? Whether I needed it?" A pause. Short. The kind that means the answer is no, and he is deciding how to frame it. "You've always been independent. That's not a criticism." "Did you ever plan to tell me?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Tell you what? You wouldn't have known what to do with it." I held the phone very still. My hand was on the desk beside my keyboard, and I could feel the surface of the desk under my palm, the solid plain fact of it. 47 employees, 9 years of contracts, a company I had named after the woman whose money he had decided I wouldn't know what to do with. "I have to go," I said. "Reese." His voice shifted, not softer but pointed, the voice he used when he wanted to make sure a warning had landed. "Remember who controls this family's finances." I hung up. I sat for a moment looking at the staffing schedule on my screen. Then I opened a new document and started making notes. 2 days after that, Vivian called. She suggested lunch. Her voice had the particular warmth she used when she wanted something, not money or favors, just to be perceived as the reasonable one. We met at a restaurant on Bay Street, white tablecloths, good light, the kind of place where the portions are small and the wine list is long and women come to have conversations they can describe as mature later. She was already seated when I arrived. Honey highlights fresh, engagement ring positioned on the table like it was part of the place setting. "I'm so glad you came," she said. She touched my arm when I sat down. "Dad was harsh. You know how he gets about appearances. He called me a poor cleaner in front of 8 people. He was stressed. The seating chart alone took 3 weeks. She picked up her menu. "You look tired. Are you sleeping?" The waiter came. We ordered. Vivian talked about the wedding, the centerpieces, which had been a negotiation, the honeymoon, which was Tuscany, which she had chosen over Santorini because Tuscany was more them. She talked about Troy's family and how they were a lot, but in a good way. She asked me what I thought about outdoor ceremonies in September heat. She did not ask me once what I did for a living. 30 minutes in, there was a small silence, and I said, "I've been running a company for 9 years. She looked up from the breadbasket. Something moved through her face, and whatever it was, she recovered from it quickly. "Is that what you call it?" She smiled. Not unkindly, she would have said, the way you smile at a child who tells you they've been practicing magic tricks. I paid the check. She reached for her bag and then didn't, the gesture of someone who expected the reach to be stopped. I let it land. I signed the receipt and stood up and said it was good to see her, and she said we should do this more often, and I said sure. That evening, I drove back to the office. It was after 7. Denise had gone home and the building was quiet, just the hum of the air system and the particular stillness of a workspace after hours. I pulled up the full vendor map again on my secondary monitor and sat with it. The pattern in Troy's invoices had not changed. 3 shell companies rotating. 15 to 20% over standard market rate on every line item. The excess routed out before the final payment cleared. He had been doing it across multiple events, not just the Whitfield wedding. The amounts were not individually dramatic. Stacked together across 18 months of bookings, they were. My company had been sitting at the top of that chain, unknowingly subsidizing his operation. Every time a payment moved through Amory Services Group's subcontracting network, a fraction of it was being skimmed before it reached the end vendor. We had not been defrauded directly. We had been used as infrastructure. I called Cole at 8:15. "I need you to open a full audit on the Whitfield wedding vendor chain," I said. "Not just the trust. Everything. Every invoice, every subcontractor, every payment record we can pull." A pause. I heard him set something down. "Once that starts," he said, "it doesn't stop." Outside my office window, the lights of downtown Savannah were coming on one by one over the river. I had looked at this view for 3 years from this desk. I had built the company that paid for the lease on this office by starting with a single crew and a borrowed van and a contract that nobody else wanted because the hours were overnight and the location was far and the client was difficult. It stopped for me a long time ago, I thought. What I said was, "I know. Do it." Cole said he would send the authorization form in the morning. I printed it, signed it, and scanned it back to him before I left the building. The scanner light passed over the page in one clean sweep. I watched it go. On the way home, I stopped at Bonaventure Cemetery. The gate was still open. I parked and walked in by memory, through the live oaks hung with Spanish moss that turned everything to shadow and silver in the early dark. June Amory's headstone was in the older section, near the back wall, under a tree that dropped small yellow flowers in summer and had covered the bench beside the grave in them. I sat on the bench. The flowers were dry under my hands. "You always said I was the one who understood work," I said. "I think you meant something else." The cemetery was quiet except for insects and the distant sound of the river. I reached up and unclasped the locket and held it in my palm. I opened it. Inside was a photo of June on the left side, taken sometime in the 1970s, young and laughing at something outside the frame. On the right side, folded very small, was a slip of paper I had known was there since she gave it to me and had never opened. I looked at it for a moment. Then I closed the locket and clasped it back around my neck. Not yet. I sat on the bench a little longer. The yellow flowers were soft under my hands. I thought about my grandmother laying out trust documents on her kitchen table when I was 16, the way she had looked at me while the attorney talked, like she was checking something, like she was making a small calculation about the future and finding it satisfactory. She had known what she was doing. She had known who she was leaving it to and why and what it would require. I stood up, brushed the flowers from my hands, walked back to my car through the dark beneath the oaks. The authorization had already sent. The audit had already started. I had already crossed a line I could not uncross, and the strange thing, walking through that cemetery in the quiet of a Thursday night, was that I could not locate any fear about it. What I felt was something closer to the sensation of finally picking up a box you have been stepping around for years. Heavy. Real. Already in my hands. The audit authorization had been in Cole's inbox for one day when I found out about the dinner. Mom posted the photo on a Friday evening. I was at my desk finishing a vendor renewal when the notification came through on my phone, and I looked at it the way you look at things that aren't meant to hurt you and do anyway. 14 people around the dining room table in my parents' house. The good china. The centerpiece Mom only brought out for occasions Gerald decided were worth it. 14 people, which meant the immediate family, plus Troy's parents and his sister and her husband, and a college friend of Vivian's I recognized from old holiday photos. I counted the chairs. I did it twice, the way you double-check a number when the first result doesn't seem right. 14 chairs. 14 people. The chair at the far left, the one that had been mine for the first 18 years of my life. The one I could find in the dark by memory because I had sat in it for every meal that mattered and every meal that didn't was not empty. Troy was sitting in it. Not like he had taken it by accident. Not like it was the only open seat. He was leaning back in it with his arm on the armrest and his chin tilted toward Vivian, relaxed, fully present, a man who had been placed somewhere and felt at home there. The caption underneath the photo read, "Our whole family together." I set my phone face down on the desk. I picked it up again. Our whole family together. The chair was not empty. That was the thing I could not stop returning to, sitting in my office in the quiet of a Friday evening with the city going dark outside my windows. It was not that they hadn't saved me a seat, which would have been its own kind of wound. It was that they had removed the chair and put someone else in it. The absence had been furnished. They had taken the negative space where I was supposed to be and filled it, and then photographed it and captioned it and posted it publicly, our whole family together. I called my mother. She picked up on the third ring, and I could hear the sounds of the dinner still going in the background. Glasses and low voices, somebody laughing at something in the other room. "Reese." Her voice went careful the way it always did when she was caught between two things she did not want to manage simultaneously. "Why wasn't I invited?" A pause. The background noise shifted as she moved somewhere quieter. "Your father thought it would be easier for everyone." "Easier for everyone," I said. "It's a pre-wedding dinner. Emotions are running high and he didn't want to ask, did you know about the trust?" Silence. Long enough that I heard her breath change. Long enough that I already knew the answer before she said anything. "He said it was for the best," she said finally. "You were so young and Vivian needed cash." "Vivian needed my money." "Risa, I want you to hear what you just said to me." She started crying, the soft, controlled kind she used when she wanted the conversation to be about her distress instead of what she had done. I had been listening to that particular sound my entire life, and I knew its weight exactly. "I have to go," I said. I hung up. The office was very quiet. I sat in it for a minute without moving, looking at the vendor renewal on my screen that I had not finished, and then I turned my chair away from the desk and looked at the window instead. Savannah at night from the 4th floor. The river in the distance, the old bridge lit up, a container ship moving slow as something asleep. She had known. Not the details, maybe, not the account numbers and the redirected payments. But she had known that my share had been used and that I had not received it, and that this was the way things were. And she had stayed at that table and said nothing for 8 years. And then she had posted a photo of the chair where I was supposed to be and called it her whole family. I was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. The next morning, Troy called. I did not have his number saved. It came up as unknown, and I almost didn't answer, but something in the rhythm of it, the Saturday morning timing of it, made me pick up. Ree. His voice was warm in the way that takes effort. Not naturally warm, effortfully warm, the way a room sounds when someone has turned the heat up too high and is hoping you won't notice. It's Troy. Calloway. Vivian's Troy. I know who you are. Of course you do. A small laugh. The kind that's meant to make you feel included. I wanted to reach out personally. I know things have been tense, and I thought maybe we could all just, let bygones be bygones. There's a rehearsal dinner next week. Family only. Very low key. It would mean a lot to Viv. He called her Viv. He called me Ree. 2 syllables apiece, like we were already the kind of family that had shorthand. I appreciate that, I said. Yeah? I could hear him lean into it. Because I think if we all just sat down together. I'm busy next week. A beat. Brief, but I caught it. Something recalibrating behind the warmth. Sure, of course. Are you at least, doing okay? Business-wise, I know it's been a rough stretch for a lot of the service industry. There it was. I had spent 6 years managing vendor relationships, which meant 6 years of learning to recognize the sound of someone who wants information and is deciding how directly to ask for it. Troy was not direct. Troy was the kind of man who asked about your health when he wanted to know about your finances. Business is good, I said. Thanks for calling. I hung up before he answered. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment after that. He was nervous. I did not know exactly what he knew or how much the audit had already disturbed the surface of things. But something had made Troy Calloway pick up a phone on a Saturday morning and call a woman he had never made any effort to know. That meant something was already moving. Good, I thought. Let it move. But that night was harder than I expected. Cole had called that afternoon to let me know the forensic accounting team had started pulling records, and that the timeline for full recovery was likely to be a year or more. Legal fees for trust litigation were running between $15,000 and $20,000 to start, and the forensic work added another layer. My company was solvent. It was healthy, actually, by any reasonable measure. But a major venue client in Atlanta had delayed their quarterly payment by 60 days, citing a budget review, and the gap between what was coming in and what I was spending on the investigation was real. I had done the math 3 times, and the math was fine, technically, and I was still awake at midnight doing it a 4th time. I sat at my desk with my laptop open and the numbers in front of me and thought about letting it go. 10 minutes. That's how long I let myself sit with that thought. My father was 61 years old and had been managing my grandmother's money for 15 years and had been wrong about me for 33, and I was sitting at midnight doing the math on whether I could afford to make him accountable for it. And the answer was yes, technically, and the thought of continuing was still exhausting in a way the numbers couldn't touch. I pushed back from the desk and went to the kitchen for water and came back and stood in front of the bookshelf on the far wall where I kept the things I didn't want to put in storage but didn't look at often. A box on the bottom shelf had my name written on it in my grandmother's handwriting. I had brought it from her house when the estate was sorted and put it there and not opened it. Mostly it was photographs. June at various ages, June with her sisters, June and my grandfather before he died, standing in front of a house I didn't recognize. A few of me and Vivian as children, the kind of photos grandmothers keep. And then, near the bottom, a photograph I didn't know existed. Me at 12, in my grandmother's kitchen. I was at the sink, sleeves pushed up, washing something. June was at the table behind me, looking toward the camera, smiling the particular smile she had when she was pleased about something she wasn't going to explain. Spread on the table in front of her were documents. I could see the estate attorney's letterhead on the top one, though I hadn't known what it was at 12. I turned the photo over. In June's handwriting, blue ink slightly slanted the way her letters always were, my worker bee. I sat down on the floor with the photo in my hands. Not dramatically. I just ran out of the energy required to remain upright in a chair. I did not cry right away. I sat for a while first. The apartment was completely quiet around me, the kind of quiet that gets into the space between things. And I held the photograph and looked at my grandmother's handwriting and thought about the woman who had sat at her kitchen table with a lawyer and made sure that the granddaughter at the sink doing the dishes without being asked would have something of her own one day. She had seen something in me that she trusted. She had put it in writing and she had paid an attorney to protect it, and my father had undone it quietly over years while we all went on having Thanksgiving and calling it family. When I cried, it was not the dramatic kind. It was the tired kind, the kind that comes after you have held something at arm's length for a long time and your arms have finally given out. I was tired of earning what was already mine. I was tired of being the one who stayed quiet to keep the peace that was never actually peaceful. I was tired of the version of myself that had screenshotted an email that said she can come if she behaves and filed it neatly under the date and told herself it did not matter. It mattered. It had always mattered. I had just been very good at convincing myself otherwise, which was a skill I had learned from the same family that required it. I put the photograph on the coffee table where I could see it. I went back to my desk. Monday, I was going to tell Cole to pull everything, not just the trust, not just the audit, the whole floor. I just needed to get through the night first. The decision came at 4 a.m. Not as a thought exactly, more like the conclusion of a process that had been running without my supervision while I slept badly on the couch with June's photograph on the table in front of me. I woke up and the apartment was gray and the coffee maker's clock said 4:12, and I lay still for a moment and felt the specific texture of having made up my mind. I made coffee, strong, the way I make it when I need to be precise. I carried the mug to the kitchen table and opened my laptop and pulled up 2 documents side by side. The full audit report on the left, preliminary but already thick with numbers. My grandmother's trust filing on the right, the original, the one with her signature at the bottom in the same slanted blue ink as the back of the photograph. I sat with them for a while. My inheritance had funded the wedding I was banned from attending. That was not a metaphor or an interpretation. That was a sequence of transactions, documented, time-stamped, traceable. Her money had paid for the venue and the florals and the catering and the dress. And I had been turned away at the gate and called a poor cleaner in front of 8 people who all went inside and ate the food. I closed the audit report, opened it again, closed it. I picked up my phone and called Cole. It was 4:20 in the morning and he answered on the second ring, which meant I was not the only one who had been awake. "We're not just recovering the trust," I said. "We're pulling the service contract." A silence. Not the surprised kind. The kind that means he was already there and was waiting for me to arrive. "Okay," he said. "I want to do it right. Clean. Every step documented. Come in at 8, he said. We'll build the whole thing." I said I would be there. I set the phone on the table. Outside the kitchen window, the sky over Savannah was just beginning to change. The particular gray that comes before color. The hour that is neither night nor morning, but something in between that has its own quality of silence. I thought about my grandmother in her kitchen at 6 a.m, the way she moved through it, unhurried, deliberate. A woman who had learned that most problems responded better to patience than to force, but who also knew the difference between patience and waiting for permission. She had left me something. My father had taken it, and she had put my name in a legal document and paid an attorney to stand behind it, which meant that somewhere in the architecture of what she had built, she had anticipated this. She had planned for the possibility that someone would try to take it back. I was going to find out exactly what she had planned. I finished my coffee, got dressed, drove to Cole's office 2 hours early, and sat in the parking garage reading through the audit report page by page until the building opened. And when Cole walked in at 8:02, I was already in the conference room with everything spread on the table and a second cup of coffee I had made from the machine in the lobby. He looked at the table, looked at me, sat down and opened his legal pad. "All right," he said, "let's take it apart." Cole laid it out in the conference room with the kind of methodical calm that I had learned over 6 years meant he was being careful because the thing on the table was fragile and powerful at the same time. Step 1. Amory Services Group would send a formal withdrawal notice to Hargrove Estate, citing an internal compliance review, effective immediately. The notice would be professional and precise. It would not explain itself beyond the compliance language because it did not need to. Step 2. The payment clause on page 11 of the booking agreement, the one Gerald had signed without a lawyer in the room, would activate. The venue would be entitled to seek emergency replacement services, and the client who had signed the primary booking, Gerald Whitfield personally, would be liable for the difference between the contracted rate and whatever emergency rate the venue could negotiate on 48 hours' notice. Step 3. The full audit report, packaged as a formal demand, would be sent to Gerald directly. Not through his attorney, because he did not have one yet. Directly to him, with his name on the envelope. Step 4. If the evidence of Troy's vendor fraud crossed the threshold, Cole's forensic contact had indicated it would, we would file a report with the State Attorney General's office. We would not make that call. We would simply provide the documentation to the appropriate authority and let the process work. Cole folded his hands on the table when he was done. "You're not attacking them," he said. "You're removing the floor they're standing on." I looked at the papers spread between us. My grandmother's trust documents. The audit report. The booking contract with Gerald's signature at the bottom, slightly crooked. The signature of a man who had signed things for 30 years without reading them, because reading them had never been necessary before. "Send the withdrawal notice today," I said. He sent it that afternoon. I was in a site review in Beaufort when my phone started moving. First, the venue manager, Rachel, whose name came up while I was walking a corridor with my operations manager beside me, and I excused myself and stepped outside into the heat. Rachel had been managing Hargrove Estate for 7 years. We had worked together on 14 events. She was good at her job, and she was in a difficult position that was not her fault, and I kept both of those things in mind when I picked up Reese. Her voice was tight in the way that meant she had been managing something stressful for the past hour. "I have Gerald Whitfield on hold threatening to sue the venue. He's saying there's been an error with the service contract." "There's no error," I said. "We filed a formal withdrawal this morning citing an internal compliance review. He received a copy. He says he's never heard of your company." I looked out at the Beaufort Marsh from the venue's side entrance, the particular flat gold of the cordgrass in afternoon light. "That's the problem," I said. A pause. "Is there anything I can do on our end?" "You can remind him that he signed the primary booking agreement personally, and that the payment clause on page 11 of that agreement is in full effect. I'd recommend he consult an attorney before he calls you back." Rachel was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted to something more careful, the tone of someone recalibrating. "Understood," she said. "Thank you, Reese." I stood in the heat for another minute after we hung up. The marsh smelled like salt and low tide and the particular alive smell of standing water in August. Somewhere on the other side of the building, a caterer was unloading a van for a different event, a different family's day, and the sound of it, the ordinary mechanical sound of work being done, settled something in me that had been slightly elevated since morning. The envelope I had prepared arrived at my father's house 2 days later. I knew because Denise, who had helped me assemble it and who did not know the full story but knew enough to understand it was significant, tracked the delivery confirmation and sent me a text that just said, "Delivered. 11:42 a.m. I was at my desk. I looked at the message. I set my phone face down and went back to the staffing report I had been reviewing. I did not imagine the moment. I did not picture his face when he opened it. I had learned, somewhere in the past 3 months, that anticipating other people's pain was its own kind of trap, and I was trying to stay out of traps. What I knew was this. He was sitting at the kitchen table with Vivian reviewing something wedding-related. The final vendor confirmations or the thank you note list or the honeymoon itinerary, and a white envelope arrived with a return address he didn't recognize. And he opened it the way he opened everything, with the unhurried confidence of a man who expected correspondence to be manageable. $187,000. Breach of contract clause. Audit flag pending formal demand. Immediate payment required. Amory Services Group. The company he had never heard of. The company whose name was on the primary booking agreement he had signed personally without reading page 11. He picked up his phone. I did not answer. He called again. I went to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, drank it standing at the sink, came back to my desk, his name on my screen. I set the phone on the windowsill and watched the notification come and go. Vivian called next. Troy after that. Mom called once late on the second day and did not leave a message. I watched all of it come in over 48 hours. The calls stacking up, 98 of them by the time I sat down to count, and I did not perform anything about it. I went to work. I took Clover, my dog, for her evening walk along the river. I read the novel I had been trying to finish for 2 months. I did not check my personal phone until I was ready to, and when I was ready to, I checked it briefly and set it back down. I was not ignoring them. I was simply no longer participating in a system where their urgency set my schedule. On the third day, Troy's panic reached the vendor chain. I heard about it secondhand from Denise, who had a contact at a staffing company Troy worked with regularly. Someone had been pulling invoices, and word had moved through the network the way it always does in small industries where everybody knows everybody's business manager. Troy had called Gerald. I found out the substance of that call later from a source I had not expected, but the summary was this. Troy had said who did this, and Gerald had said, it's Reese's company, she owns the whole vendor chain. And Troy had said, that's impossible, she's a cleaner. And Gerald, for the first time in a conversation I had no way of witnessing, had said nothing, because he had known, somewhere in the part of himself that processed facts he preferred not to face, that Troy was wrong, that he had been wrong, that the daughter he had publicly dismissed at the gate of a wedding venue had been running a company that serviced that venue, that had serviced events like it for years, and that he had signed a contract with her without knowing it, because he had never once asked what she did for a living. He had assumed, and now he was sitting with the assumption. Vivian left a voicemail on my personal cell the evening of the third day. I'm not sure what you think you're doing, but you're ruining my wedding. I listened to it once, standing in my kitchen with the refrigerator open, looking for something to eat. I saved it, not as evidence. The audit had plenty of evidence. I saved it because I wanted to remember, when all of this was over, what Vivian had considered worth protecting. He showed up on the fourth morning. I was at my desk when the front desk called back to say there was a Gerald Whitfield in reception asking to see me. No appointment. I told him to send him through. I heard his footsteps in the hall before the door opened, the particular cadence of my father walking, the unhurried but deliberate pace of a man who had spent 30 years being the one in the room who set the tempo. The door opened and he stopped. He stood in the doorway of my office and looked at the room, the reception area with Amory Services Group on the wall behind the front desk in the solid dark lettering I had chosen specifically because it read as permanent. The conference room visible through the glass partition, the framed contracts on the hallway wall, the ones I kept there not for decoration but because I liked to walk past them and remember that each one represented a relationship I had built myself, my name on the door. He looked at all of it. Then he looked at me, behind my desk, in the chair I had sat in for 6 years. Since when? He said. It was not really a question. Since I was 24, I said. You never asked. He came in, sat down across from me without being invited, which was exactly what I had expected. Cole was already in the chair to my left, which I had also arranged. Gerald glanced at Cole the way he glanced at anyone he didn't recognize and whose presence suggested a dynamic he hadn't anticipated. He started with the invoice. He wanted it reduced. He said there had been a misunderstanding about the scope of the service agreement. He said he had not been aware of all the terms, which was the closest he would come to admitting he had not read what he signed. He said that pulling the service contract 2 days before the event had been unnecessarily aggressive, and that a phone call would have resolved it. I let him finish. Then I placed 2 documents on the table between us. The trust accounting, the one that showed in clean columns where my inheritance had gone, into an account that fed Vivian's down payment, into the deposits for a wedding at a venue my company cleaned, and the audit trail, 41 pages showing Troy's vendor rotation, the shell companies. The pattern that my operations manager had flagged and I had recognized, and Cole's forensic team had now documented with timestamps and wire records and the kind of paper that holds up in a formal proceeding. Gerald's face, when he looked at the first document, had a specific quality I had not seen before. Not anger, not the controlled dismissal he used as his primary register, something quieter and more final, like the expression of a man who has just understood the shape of a mistake that cannot be managed. He had not known about Troy, That was clear reading his face across the table. He had known about his own redirection of the trust funds. He had not known that his future son-in-law had been skimming from the same vendor chain using the same event as cover. I watched it happen in real time. The moment his eyes moved from the trust accounting to the audit trail and understood that the two documents were not separate problems. They were the same problem. He had cleared the path for Troy without knowing it. He had taken my inheritance and put it into a wedding that Troy then systematically over-invoiced, which meant that a portion of June's money had been skimmed twice, once by Gerald and once by the man Gerald had welcomed to the table, photographed at Thanksgiving, and called family. His jaw tightened. His right hand pressed flat against the page. The signet ring I had looked at my entire life caught the light from the conference room window and held it. He did not look up. He sat with it. A long time. Longer than I expected from a man who had spent 30 years in rooms where decisions moved fast. Cole did not move beside me. I did not move. The ordinary sounds of the building continued outside the glass, and Gerald Whitfield sat in a chair he had not been invited to and understood for the first time the full architecture of what had happened to this family and what his part in it had been. He sat with the audit trail in his hands and understood that the collapse he was inside had more than one cause, and that the second one was a person he had welcomed to his table. Your grandmother, he said, would not have wanted this. I reached up and unclasped the locket. It was the work of a moment, the small familiar pressure of the clasp, and I held it in my hand and opened it. The photo of June on the left. On the right, the folded slip of paper I had been carrying for 11 years without reading. I unfolded it. June's handwriting. Blue ink. The same slant as the back of the photograph. The same deliberate pressure of a woman who meant every word she wrote, for both my girls equally. No exceptions. I trust you to do what's right, Reese. She had written my name. Not both of you. Not my granddaughters. My name. Because she had known. She had sat across from an estate attorney and arranged everything as carefully as she could, and then she had folded a piece of paper into a locket and given it to the granddaughter she trusted to do what was right. Because she had known, with the particular clear sight of someone who has watched a family for decades, who would need to fight for it. I placed the locket on the table between us. Gerald looked at it. He looked at his hands. He did not say anything. Cole said quietly, "We'll need a response to the formal demand within 14 days. Gerald nodded once. He stood up. He looked at my name on the door as he left the way he had looked at it coming in. And I watched him look at it and understood that what I was watching was a man reading something for the first time that had been true for years. The door closed behind him. Troy's notice arrived the same afternoon to his registered business address, CC'd to the State Attorney General's office. Amory Services Group had provided documentation of the vendor fraud to the relevant authority. Business license was flagged for review within 72 hours, which I knew because Cole had contacts in the process and because these things, when well documented, move faster than people expect. His own company terminated him before the week was out. The liability was too clear and too visible, and companies in the event services industry run on reputation the way plants run on water. And once the invoice rotation was visible in the audit, it was visible to everyone who looked. Troy had built a system he believed was too complex to trace. He had built it using my company's subcontracting network as infrastructure, which meant that when we pulled our documentation, we pulled the scaffolding out from under his. He was not destroyed by me. I want to be precise about that. I filed a document. The document described a system he had built. The system destroyed him. Vivian came to my apartment that evening, the same day Gerald left my office. I heard her knock and stood in my kitchen for a moment before I answered. She was in her car within the hour. But in between, there was a conversation that I will carry for a long time, not because of what was said, but because of what was not. She came in 2 steps and stopped. You destroyed my wedding. Your fiancé stole from you, I said. Your father stole from me. I showed you the receipts. You could have told me. Her voice had the particular quality of someone who wants to be angry and is finding it difficult to locate the right target. Would you have believed the cleaner? She stood in my doorway. Honey highlights. the engagement ring still on her finger, which surprised me and then didn't. She looked at me the way people look at things they have spent a long time not seeing and are now being required to see. And there was something in her face that was almost recognition, the early shape of something that would need a long time to become anything useful. She left without answering. The door closed quietly behind her. I stood in the hallway for a moment after, with the locket in my hand again, warm the way it always was, and thought about what my grandmother had known about this family and what she had left me anyway. A month passed the way months do after something large has happened. Not slowly, not quickly, just completely, the way a room empties when you finally decide to clear it out, one thing at a time, until the space is unfamiliar and yours simultaneously. I heard about the wedding secondhand, which was the appropriate distance. A cousin texted me the week after, not to be unkind, just one of those messages that people send when they are not sure what side they are on and default to information. 40 guests, she wrote. Backyard at Aunt Cheryl's. Vivian went through with it. I read that twice. Vivian went through with it. Without Troy. Without the luxury estate venue. Without the 200 guests. Without the centerpieces that had taken 3 weeks to negotiate. Without the rehearsal dinner and the hired string quartet and the ceremony that had been designed to prove something to everyone she knew. She had gotten married in her aunt's backyard in September heat with 40 people watching, and I did not know whether that required more courage than the original plan or less, and I decided it was not mine to calculate. Gerald's property had a lien on it by then. His name was in the industry network in a way that would follow him, not loudly, not in any format he could directly confront or refute, but present. The country club, the golf contacts, the retired banker's social circuit. They were a small world, and small worlds have long memories. The man who had stood at the top of stone steps and called his daughter a poor cleaner had become, in the accounting of the community he cared most about impressing. The man whose financial conduct had been flagged and whose future son-in-law had been terminated for fraud. These things do not announce themselves. They simply alter the temperature of rooms. Mom had moved to a rental apartment on the east side of Savannah. She had done it quietly, without drama, which was how she did most things. I knew because she had called to give me the new address. A practical call, clipped and careful. And I had written it down and said thank you, and she had said of course, and we had sat in a brief silence that had more in it than either of us knew how to name yet. I went to Cole's office on a Thursday in October when the light had finally shifted from the flat white of summer to something with more angle to it. The kind of afternoon that makes Savannah look like a painting of itself. He was already at the conference table when I arrived, the same table where we had laid out everything 6 weeks ago, and he had a single folder in front of him and a mug of coffee and the particular stillness that meant he had something straightforward to tell me. The recovery is in process, he said. Full share, $214,000. Timeline is 6 months, maybe 5 if the trustee cooperation holds, which I expect it will because Gerald does not want this to go any further than it already has. I sat down across from him. The legal fees, I said, covered by the trust's penalty provisions. He opened the folder. June's estate plan included a clause for trustee mismanagement, standard in well-drafted trusts, but someone has to know to look for it. He looked up at me. Your grandmother knew to ask for it. I thought about that. June sitting across from an estate attorney in her house on Abercorn Street, asking specific questions in the specific way she had, the way she asked for everything she needed, without apology and without excess. She planned for this, I said. She planned for the possibility, Cole said. She hoped she was wrong. We sat with that for a moment, the two of us, in the October light coming through his office windows, with the folder open between us and my grandmother's intention sitting in the room like a third presence. She wasn't wrong, I said. No, he said, she wasn't. I signed the forms he had prepared. They were clean and straightforward, the way documents are when the facts are unambiguous and the preparation has been thorough. I signed my name in the places indicated and Cole witnessed them, and I put the pen down and looked at my signature and thought about the girl who had written the same name on a small business loan application 9 years ago in an office not much larger than a closet, with no collateral and one crew and a contract she had negotiated herself. Same name, same handwriting, different amount of paperwork behind her. I met my mother at Forsyth Park on a Saturday morning in late October. She was already on the bench when I arrived, which meant she had come early, which was not like her. She had always been someone who arrived precisely on time, which I understood now as a management strategy, the strategy of someone who preferred to enter situations already in progress rather than wait in them. She was sitting with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the fountain. She looked smaller than I remembered, not physically. The other way, the way people look when they have stopped performing something they have been performing for a long time. I sat down beside her. We did not hug. We had not been a hugging family, which was one of many things I had stopped blaming myself for. She did not apologize again. She had done that already, in pieces, over several phone calls in the weeks after everything had collapsed, and I had received each piece and set it down and not done much with it yet. That would take longer. I knew that about myself. What she said instead was this: I kept those trust papers in my nightstand for 8 years. She was still looking at the fountain. Every year I told myself I would give them to you. Every year I decided it would cause too much trouble. I waited. I told myself you were managing fine, that you didn't need it, that bringing it up would only make things worse. She paused. I told myself a lot of things. It caused trouble anyway, I said. I know. Her hands tightened in her lap, then loosened. The kind of trouble that was already there. I just didn't want to be the one who named it. We sat in silence for a while. The fountain ran steadily in front of us. A woman walked past with a stroller, and a man threw a ball for a brown dog, and the park went on being itself around us in the ordinary, unhurried way of Saturday mornings in October. It was not forgiveness, what I felt sitting beside her. I want to be honest about that. Forgiveness is something I have come to understand takes longer than a month and requires more than a park bench and a fountain, and I was not going to pretend otherwise. But it was something. The beginning of a conversation that had not been possible before, because the thing in the middle of it, the thing we had both been arranging our silences around for years, was finally on the table. Named, documented, resolved in the specific, legal, financial sense of the word. What was left was just the two of us, sitting on a bench in October, having run out of the usual obstacles. She asked if I wanted to get coffee. I said yes. We walked to a place nearby and sat at an outside table and ordered, and she told me about the new apartment, the light in the morning, the neighbor's cat that visited the window box, ordinary things. And I listened and said ordinary things back, and it was not comfortable exactly, but it was real, which I had decided was worth more than comfortable. My father called on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks later. I was reading on my couch with Clover asleep across my feet when his name came up on my phone. I looked at it through 2 full rings. Then I answered. Reese. His voice was different. Not softer, not warmer, just reduced somehow, the way a room sounds after the furniture has been moved out. I need to understand something. I waited. Why did you do this? It was not a question quite. I set the phone on the cushion beside me. I reached for my laptop on the coffee table and opened it. Clover lifted her head and looked at me and put it back down. I found the folder I had labeled, with the date, the one I had made the morning the invitation arrived, when I had stood at my kitchen counter and read the email chain 3 times with my coffee going cold, and told myself it did not matter. I opened the screenshot. The same words I had looked at 100 times. I picked up the phone. I'm going to read you something, I said. He said nothing. I read it aloud. Keep Reese off the main list. She can come to the reception if she behaves. The silence that followed was the longest of the conversation, long enough that I heard his breath shift once, long enough that Clover raised her head again and looked across the room at me. I wrote that, he said. I know. I didn't think you'd amount to anything. He said it the way you say something you have decided to say and have been deciding for a long time, carefully, like setting a glass down on an unsteady surface. Not an apology. He was not built for apologies, and I had stopped waiting for them sometime in the past year without fully noticing. This was something closer to arrival. A man at 61 reaching the outermost edge of a truth he had been standing beside for 33 years. You wrote the whole script, I said. I just let it play out. A silence. Okay, he said. I hung up. Clover shifted against my feet, settled, sighed once, and went still. Outside the window, the street was quiet, the particular Tuesday evening quiet of a neighborhood where people are home and the day is winding down. The kind of quiet that has nothing to prove. I sat with the phone in my hand and waited to feel something more than what I felt, and when nothing additional arrived, I set the phone on the cushion beside me and went back to my book. There was a letter in my office inbox the following Monday. Professional letterhead, Hargrove Estate, Rachel's signature at the bottom in the neat, practical handwriting of someone who manages a great many things. The letter thanked Amory Services Group for 7 years of reliable partnership and asked whether we would consider reinstating the service relationship for the upcoming event season, contingent on mutual terms. I read it at my desk with my coffee in the morning, in the same chair where I had sat on a Saturday evening in a navy dress 2 months ago and decided I was not going to let it go. I read it twice. I placed it in the yes pile. Business continued. It always had. That was the thing about building something real. Something built on actual work and actual relationships, and the kind of reputation you earn by showing up and doing the thing correctly every time. It did not require anyone else's permission to keep going. It had not required it at 19, when I had taken a job no one in my family mentioned at Thanksgiving. It had not required it at 24, when I had signed my name on a small business loan and named the company after the one person who had seen what I was doing and approved of it without conditions. It did not require it now. I went to Bonaventure on a Sunday afternoon in November, when the light was low and the live oaks were doing their particular late-year thing with the Spanish moss, everything softened and silver and specific to that place. I walked to the back section by memory past the graves I had passed 100 times, and sat on the bench beside June Amory's headstone under the tree that had been dropping small yellow flowers since before I was born. I had the locket in my hand. I turned it over a few times, opened it, the photo on the left side, June laughing at something outside the frame. The right side empty, now the folded paper sitting on my desk at home where I had placed it the morning after the confrontation. After I had read it and placed it on the table between me and my father and watched him look away from it. I set the locket on the headstone, not to leave it there, just to set it down for a moment, to let it rest somewhere that was not my throat, or my pocket, or my hand. To let the gold warm in the afternoon sun for a minute while I sat on the bench and breathed. She had known what she was putting in there, not just the note, the intention behind it. A woman who had sat across from an estate attorney and negotiated specific language about trustee mismanagement had not folded a piece of paper into a locket by accident. She had built 2 structures at the same time. The legal one with its clauses and its remedies and its penalties, and the personal one, small enough to wear around your neck, written in her own hand. Addressed specifically to me. She had known I would carry it without opening it. She had known I would need to earn the right to read it, or feel that I had, and that I would understand its weight more fully after the fight than I would have before. She was not sentimental about money. She was not sentimental about family either, in the way that confuses love with agreement. What she was clear-eyed. She had looked at her son-in-law and her daughter and her 2 granddaughters and made a calculation, and the calculation had included a provision for what happens when people you trust make the wrong choice. She had hoped she was wrong. She had prepared as though she wasn't. The November light moved through the oaks above me. A bird somewhere in the canopy started something and stopped. The yellow flowers that had been falling from this tree since before I was born had covered the bench and my hands and the ground around me. And I sat in the middle of it and thought about my grandmother and what it cost to love someone clearly. I thought about a girl of 19 with rubber gloves and a mop handle, learning the name of every product in the supply closet because knowledge was the one thing no one could take out of the supply budget. I thought about a woman of 24 signing her name on a loan that everyone around her considered optimistic in the way that means foolish. I thought about 47 employees. 9 years of contracts, and a company name for a woman who had folded a piece of paper into a small gold case and asked her granddaughter to wear it on hard days. The girl and the woman were the same person. They had always been the same person. The only thing that had changed was the paperwork. I reached out and picked the locket back up, clasped it around my neck, felt its familiar weight settle against my sternum. They had called me a cleaner. They had said it like it was the end of a sentence, like it contained everything necessary to explain why I did not belong at the gate, why my chair could be removed, why my name could be crossed off a list and replaced with someone more suitable. They had just never understood what cleaners know, that you learn a place by working in it, that you understand a system by moving through it, by being the one who shows up before anyone else and stays after everyone has gone, that the person who knows where everything goes, what holds and what doesn't, what will break under pressure and what will hold, is not the person standing at the top of the steps looking down. They called me a cleaner. They just never realized I cleaned up the mess they made of this family.